So you'll hear this argument from some conservatives, but mainly anarcho-capitalists, also known as ANCAPs.
You know, I find it interesting that throughout the last month or so, I've had what seems to be a shortage of statist retards to debunk. Then, all of a sudden, when I'm planning on making a video on public education, these videos start popping up like dandelions. The irony!
And libertarians.
Also, I've noticed this really annoying thing that these lefty, anti-capitalist channels do when making videos, but what they like to do is put these propaganda images in the background which convey a message that they never try to argue in their video as to send a message to their viewers, then claim that people who point out how nonsensical it is are deflecting. But anyway, as for this propaganda image, private tyrannies do not exist, because in order for oppression to exist, there requires arbitration, since oppression cannot naturally exist and requires a systemic implementation. And the reason for that being is because it defies self-ownership, and self-ownership is an objective conclusion, as I'll explain in a moment. But simply, ethics can be arrived at objectively because, well, logic is objective. This is the reason fallacious reasoning exists, and simply broken reasoning must be rejected as it's internally inconsistent, and internal inconsistencies fundamentally cannot be defended since they pose a contradiction, and contradictions cannot exist in nature. So if someone does, for example, initiate force, they would need structural arbitration in order to stop others from using force to protect themselves or to hold the aggressor accountable. And without the government, private companies have no such method of holding themselves above the law, and the state is the only organization capable of creating arbitration like this on a systemic level, since the state, fundamentally through the social contract, is designed to create its own laws. Could you imagine, for example, if Monsanto killed a bunch of people, then was taken to court, and Hugh Grant defended himself with, well, it's not really murder because some of our corporate lawyers say it's legal for us to indiscriminately kill anyone we like at any time for any reason. Well, that is exactly what the state does.
The argument that taxation is theft, and oh boy do I wish that ANCAPs and libertarians would try moving to Somalia for a bit.
Somalia is not, nor was it ever, an anarchist society. Somalia currently has a government, and the period most statists falsely refer to as a period of anarchy, which was Somalia's transitional government period, which lasted from 1991 to 2012, was multiple different governments fighting for centralized control of the country. So not only was there a government, but it's literally the most statist place on earth. The government literally got so big that it started infighting with itself. I mean, for God's sakes, how can you morons say that Somalia was anarchist with a straight face? Because you don't know the facts?
But I'm here to talk about why taxation is not theft.
But taxation is theft. Taxation is the government coercing money out of you, and yes, statists, you may not like it, but it is coercive. You never sign any agreement which allows the state to do this, nor do you have the ability to withdraw any consent, since no agreement existed to begin with. And if you don't pay, you're held at gunpoint, and you'll be either taken to jail or killed if you resist. So, you're held at gunpoint, deprived of your property, so quite literally taxation is theft. I don't see how you can get around that. And just because you LARP in a scary official-looking uniform doesn't make you any less of a thief.
So first of all, without the state, you have no property rights. There is no such thing as property rights.
This is complete nonsense. As mentioned earlier, ethics are objective because logic is objective. An objective ethic which exists is self-ownership, since it requires arbitration for someone to not be a self-owner. If you aren't a self-owner, someone else must own you, which proposes an internal inconsistency, since there's no objective explanation for this double standard. Property rights are derived from self-ownership, since property is created as a product of the individual's own autonomy by either voluntarily trading with others or creating the property themselves. This being the case, if you create private property, this being property which is created as a product of self-ownership and not force, you own it, and you can do whatever you want with it as long as you're not violating someone else's rights with it. This is an inescapable conclusion because to deny this would be to propose a logical inconsistency. This is why anarchist societies in the past, such as Celtic Ireland, had private property without a state.
The state creates these property rights, and this is something that libertarians often stumble on.
What the fuck are you talking about? This is something libertarians go over with you statists all the time, and some of the oldest books in libertarian theory go over this exact topic, as I've just explained it.
You ask them, hey, how would there be property rights without the government? And they have no answer, and they often stutter very much because they can't explain this.
I'll take shit that never happened for 500, please.
So the state provides the landscape of property rights and everything in it.
No, the state does not produce property rights, and property is only produced by private individuals. The state does not have any ability to produce private property since it has no resources and inherently relies on the forceful appropriation of private property from individuals who produce it from their own voluntary exchanges.
Which means that everything that you do, you are including the state.
Except the state's interference is not an objectively provable conclusion and is not required for said interaction to occur and contributes nothing to the said interaction. Say, for example, I just want to buy some food from a local producer who produced the food with their own material. Where does the state need to be involved in that interaction? Nowhere. I want food so I can feed myself and maybe my family, and they want to exchange their food for my money since they need money to maintain a living and to continue producing more food to sustain their existence. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever why the state needs to be involved in this interaction. With this being the standard for any and all exchanges, this then proposes the question, why does the state need to exist? And quite simply, it doesn't. Individuals are more than capable of doing for themselves voluntarily everything that the state currently quote-unquote provides, and better, since decentralized voluntary trade comes with innovation and competition, since that is the natural conclusion of the producer's incentive to keep producing and attracting more customers to sustain their own existence. State products don't have this since they're guaranteed an income regardless of the quality of the service they provide.
So when you sign a contract with your employer or your employee or whoever, everything is attached to the state because the state creates the whole landscape of property rights and everything that goes on in the state.
Let's say that this is true hypothetically. It's not, as I've previously explained, but that's the point of hypotheticals. So, you're arguing that the state established an idea. Because of this, they're entitled to everything that came from that idea. Guess that means you should hand that computer you created this video on over to IBM since they created PCs. They obviously have a right to own every PC that's ever been made, regardless of if they were involved in the production or not.
Now, also, you are receiving things in return. It is not theft if you are receiving things in return.
No. Theft is simply when you forcefully take someone else's property. What the thief does with your property after they steal it from you is irrelevant to the fact that they stole it.
You are funding the police department, the fire department, the military defense, social welfare, all kinds of different infrastructure, all kinds of different things. Public roads, you can't tell me you don't use public roads. You can't tell me you didn't call the police, the firefighters,
And as noted before, there is absolutely no reason why these things can't be funded privately and voluntarily.
No, the military defense is something that you can't even choose to do. That's something that defends the country.
Aside from the fact that militaries, like any other organization you just mentioned, can simply be privately or voluntarily funded, what are they defending the country from? Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, Gulf War, both world wars? Can you name one war which needed to be fought in U.S. history, and wars based in response to state aggression don't count, since those wouldn't exist without a state either. And even if that is the case, that they're simply defending the U.S., what are they defending the U.S. from? Another state taking over? What would be the difference between that and what we have now?
From, obviously being taken over. Now, also, another thing is, you don't have to pay taxes. You can move to another country.
Domestic violence isn't abuse because you could just move to another house. Someone burning your house down isn't arson because you could simply move to another house. Bullying isn't bullying because you could simply move to another school. Yeah, this is a logical fallacy known as ergo decado, and it's surprisingly common as a response from statists. Well, shouldn't find it too surprising considering that these dopes think that you wouldn't have rights without the state.
Now, if you've been in the country and you've received all those goods that the government has given you, then yes, you have to pay taxes, or you're going to have to get a punishment, because otherwise people wouldn't pay taxes.
Great, so you just BTFO'd your own argument by admitting that taxation is theft since force is required to sustain it. Also, nice circular logic.